Officer Brant kicked a black teen in open court, not realizing he had just assaulted a top civil rights attorney in disguise. The entire attack was caught on camera, and in seconds, Brant's career was over. But what happened next shocked the entire courtroom and changed the justice system forever. The packed courtroom fell silent as Marcus Johnson sat with slumped shoulders at the defense table. At 22 years old, he faced 10 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. His public defender, overworked and underprepared, shuffled through papers with nervous hands, while the prosecutor stood confidently beside her immaculate exhibits. From the back row, hidden beneath a hoodie and slouched posture, 32-year-old Devin Carter watched intently. No one in the courtroom knew that beneath his baggy clothes and carefully applied prosthetic cheek pieces was one of the most brilliant civil rights attorneys in the state. For 3 years, Devin had won case after case against corrupt police officers and biased judges. But today, he was not Attorney Carter. Today, he was just Terrell, a 19-year-old kid from the projects who blended perfectly into the gallery. Officer James Brant took the stand with practiced ease. His 20-year police badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he adjusted his uniform and squared his shoulders. The veteran cop had testified in this courtroom dozens of times. His arrest record in predominantly black neighborhoods was nearly triple that of any other officer in the precinct, a statistic the department celebrated, despite the disproportionate numbers. Officer Brant, please tell the court what happened on the night of April 15th, the prosecutor requested. I observed the defendant, Marcus Johnson, acting suspiciously near West Side Convenience at approximately 11:20 p.m., Brant stated with absolute certainty in his voice. When I approached to question him, he immediately became hostile and reached toward his waistband. Believing he was armed, I subdued the suspect and discovered the stolen merchandise in his possession. Marcus shook his head silently. He had not been anywhere near that store. He had been picking up his sister from her late hospital shift across town, but it was his word against a decorated officer's testimony. In the back row, Devin's jaw tightened. He had spent months investigating Officer Brant's pattern of racial profiling and brutality. 3 black men had been hospitalized following arrests by Brant. 7 had been convicted based solely on his testimony. 2 had taken plea deals, despite maintaining their innocence. Devin had built a case file thicker than any he had worked on before. Today was supposed to be just reconnaissance, observing Brant's courtroom demeanor before filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. But as Devin watched Marcus's future slipping away, he knew that simply documenting the injustice was not enough. The system that allowed Brant to operate with impunity needed to be exposed, and Devin had come prepared for exactly that possibility. Officer Brant continued his testimony, his voice carrying throughout the courtroom with smug authority, while Marcus's inexperienced public defender struggled to formulate coherent objections. The judge, a longtime ally of the police department, dismissed each one without consideration. The stage was set for yet another wrongful conviction, another life destroyed by systemic racism disguised as justice. But not if Devin Carter had anything to say about it. Mr. Johnson was carrying approximately $200 worth of merchandise, Officer Brant continued, his voice steady and assured. He had no receipt, and his fingerprints were found on the store's back door, which had been forced open. Devin narrowed his eyes from the back row. The police report he had accessed through his contacts mentioned nothing about fingerprints. This was a new fabrication, one that the prosecution had not included in their discovery materials. Marcus leaned toward his public defender, David Reynolds, whispering urgently. Reynolds nodded and stood. Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution never provided any fingerprint evidence in discovery. Judge Lawrence Wilson, a man whose campaign had been heavily funded by the police union, barely looked up from his notes. The officer is testifying to evidence collected during standard police procedure. Overruled. The public defender faltered. "But, Your Honor, we have a right to examine all evidence before—" "I said overruled, Counselor. Move along." Judge Wilson's tone left no room for further argument. Reynolds sat down, defeated before he had even begun his cross-examination. Marcus stared ahead, his expression hardening as he realized the cards were stacked against him. From his seat near the back, Devin carefully typed notes into his phone, documenting every procedural violation. He had researched Judge Wilson extensively and knew the man had overturned only 2 police testimonies in his 15 years on the bench. Both times had involved white defendants from wealthy families. As Brant continued describing a struggle that never happened, Devin glanced around the courtroom. Most spectators appeared to accept the officer's words without question. A few nodded along, the narrative of a young black man resisting arrest fitting neatly into their preconceived notions. The truth, which Devin had uncovered through witness statements and surveillance footage from a nearby building, painted a completely different picture. Marcus had been walking home when Brant stopped him, claiming he matched a suspect description. When Marcus had produced identification and questioned the stop, Brant had become aggressive. The stolen merchandise had been planted. The arrest report was filled with fabrications, and not one piece of this exculpatory evidence was being presented. Marcus Johnson's shoulders sank lower with each passing minute. His mother sat in the first row, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. 3 job applications and an acceptance letter to community college sat in his apartment, all now meaningless as his future disintegrated before his eyes. Devin felt his heart pounding against his ribs. This scene was all too familiar. He had witnessed this exact scenario play out dozens of times in his career, but today felt different. Perhaps it was because he was not standing at the defense table in his tailored suit, armed with his law degree and confidence. Today he was powerless, just another face in the crowd. Or perhaps it was because sitting here, wearing the clothes and identity of Terrell, he was transported back 15 years. Back to when he was 17, pushed against a police car, while an officer found marijuana in his backpack. Marijuana Devin had never seen before. He remembered the sting of the handcuffs, the horror on his mother's face at the station, the public defender who had spent all of 10 minutes with him before recommending he take a plea deal. If not for Mr. Richardson, his high school teacher who had witnessed the arrest and testified on his behalf, Devin might never have made it to law school, might never have become the attorney who had helped dozens of young men escape the same fate that now awaited Marcus. Devin's fingers hovered over his phone. He had planned to stay silent, to document everything for the formal complaint and the civil case he would later file. Exposing himself now would compromise months of investigation. But watching Marcus, seeing the light of hope fade from his eyes, Devin wondered if justice delayed was truly justice at all. He was no longer 17 and powerless. He had the knowledge now. He had the evidence. And he had the voice. The question was whether he should use it today. Furthermore, Officer Brant continued, his testimony growing more elaborate with each unchallenged statement, the defendant had been observed by store employees loitering in the area for several days prior to the robbery. When questioned about this, he became belligerent. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. He had never been to that store before the night of his arrest. And was his behavior consistent with other criminals you have apprehended, Officer Brant? The prosecutor asked, setting up another damaging response. Absolutely. In my 20 years on the force, I have observed that this pattern of hostility and resistance is typical among repeat offenders. The defendant's reaction was textbook. Reynolds, the public defender, rose again. Objection, Your Honor. My client has no prior record. This characterization is prejudicial. The officer is speaking from his professional experience, Counselor, Judge Wilson replied sharply. The jury understands he is offering expert testimony. Overruled. 2 jurors nodded along, clearly swayed by Brant's authority and expertise. Devin recognized the power dynamic at play. a respected officer's word against a young black man's. It was a script he had seen play out countless times, with the same ending virtually guaranteed. A middle-aged woman in the jury box glanced sympathetically at Marcus before looking away. She was the only one who seemed to harbor any doubt. One potential ally among 12 would not be enough. Brant was now describing how Marcus had allegedly threatened him during the arrest, another complete fabrication. The hospital report Devin had obtained showed that Marcus had suffered a dislocated shoulder during the arrest, yet Brant was painting himself as the victim. Devin's trained legal mind identified at least 7 grounds for objection in the last 5 minutes alone: hearsay, lack of foundation, improper character evidence, violations of Brady disclosure requirements. The defense was raising none of them effectively. Critically, Brant had just contradicted his own police report about the time of the arrest, a discrepancy that could unravel his entire testimony if properly highlighted. It was the kind of mistake Devin lived for in cross-examinations, the loose thread that could unravel an entire fabricated story. But Reynolds missed it entirely. Devin slid his phone into his pocket and quietly pulled out the slim file he had brought with him. Beneath his hoodie, he unbuttoned the top of his shabby shirt, revealing the crisp collar of a dress shirt underneath. His fingers brushed against the voice recorder he had activated at the beginning of Brant's testimony. He had come prepared for this moment, had almost anticipated it. The multiple disguise layers had been a precaution he now was grateful for. The prosthetics on his face would come off easily, transforming Terrell into Attorney Devin Carter in seconds. In his mind, he rehearsed the legal precedents he would cite: Commonwealth versus Richardson, State versus Michaels, Brady versus Maryland. He mentally outlined his argument regarding evidence suppression and witness intimidation, charges he could substantiate with the documentation in his possession. Devin took a deep breath. 20 feet away, Marcus Johnson sat with his head bowed, already defeated. Officer Brant was now describing how he had found additional evidence linking Marcus to other unsolved crimes, a complete fabrication that crossed the line from selective truth into outright perjury. The judge was allowing it all. The time for observation was over. Devin checked the recording device one last time, ensuring it was capturing every word of Brant's increasingly confident lies. He would need this evidence later, both for Marcus's case and for what he was about to do. As Brant launched into yet another fabricated detail about Marcus's arrest, Devin made his decision. He straightened his posture, slowly rising from his slouched position. His hand moved toward the zipper of his hoodie. Years of courtroom experience steadied his nerves as he prepared to reveal himself. The moment had come to transform from observer to advocate, from Terrell to Attorney Devin Carter. And Officer James Brant had no idea what was about to hit him. What would you do if you witnessed someone being wrongfully convicted? Comment your thoughts below. Objection. This is a violation of Rule 602. Witness testimony is inadmissible without personal knowledge. The voice rang out from the back of the courtroom, silencing Officer Brant mid-sentence. All heads turned toward the source. There stood Terrell, no longer slouching but standing tall, his hoodie still up, but his demeanor completely transformed. Judge Wilson's face reddened. In 15 years on the bench, no spectator had ever interrupted his courtroom. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, gavel raised threateningly. Marcus and his attorney exchanged bewildered glances. The prosecutor froze, files in hand. Terrell stepped into the center aisle. "Someone who cannot sit by and watch this miscarriage of justice continue. Officer Brant just committed perjury for the 3rd time today." Officer Brant's confident posture stiffened. He rose from the witness stand, jaw clenched. "Your Honor, permission to address this disruption?" Without waiting for the judge's response, Brant stormed toward Terrell, muscles tense beneath his uniform. Court security officers stood uncertain, watching the judge for direction. "This is not some TV show, boy," Brant growled, reaching Terrell and grabbing him roughly by the collar. "Sit your ass down before I—" Terrell did not flinch. His eyes stayed locked with Brant's, unwavering. The courtroom fell silent, shocked by both the disruption and the officer's aggressive response. "Or what?" Terrell asked calmly. "You will falsify another report? Plant evidence? Maybe choke me like you did Jamal Reynolds last year?" Brant's eyes widened. The Jamal Reynolds case had been quietly settled out of court. The records sealed, the incident buried in paperwork and confidentiality agreements. "How do you know about—" Brant caught himself, aware of the packed courtroom. Terrell continued, his voice growing stronger. "People's Exhibit C contradicts your testimony about the time of arrest. That is violation of State Statute 140.2 regarding sworn testimony. Your claim about fingerprint evidence violates Brady disclosure requirements, as no such evidence was presented to the defense, and your characterization of Mr. Johnson as belligerent constitutes improper character assassination under Rule 404B. The legal precision coming from a teenager in baggy clothes stunned the courtroom. The public defender, Reynolds, stared open-mouthed, recognizing arguments he should have made himself. "Furthermore," Terrell continued, "your sworn statement claims you witnessed Mr. Johnson exiting through the store's back door at 11:20 p.m., yet hospital records show you were across town at Mercy Hospital with another suspect at 11:15 p.m. Impossible to be in two places simultaneously, Officer Brant." Brant's face contorted with confusion and growing rage. "Who are you? How could you possibly—" "I know about the dashcam footage you accidentally deleted in the Garcia case last month too, and the witness statements you intimidated in the Robinson trial. Quite a pattern, Officer Brant." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Several spectators pulled out phones, sensing something historic unfolding. Camera sounds clicked throughout the gallery. Marcus Johnson lifted his head, confusion giving way to a flicker of hope for the first time since his arrest. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently, but Reynolds seemed just as bewildered by the turn of events. "Who is that kid?" someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. The prosecutor frantically shuffled through papers, seeking to verify or refute the claims being made about the evidence. Her confident demeanor had vanished. Judge Wilson slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order in this court." But his authoritative facade had cracked. He shot nervous glances between Brant and the court clerk, unsure how to proceed with this unprecedented disruption. Marcus's mother gripped the bench in front of her, knuckles white, prayers whispered under her breath as she watched the scene unfold. The public defender finally found his voice. "Your Honor, in light of these allegations, I move that we re-examine the evidence immediately." His legal training was kicking in, recognizing the lifeline being thrown to his client. "Silence," Judge Wilson shouted. "Young man, you are in contempt of court. Security, remove him immediately." The security officers hesitated, uncomfortable with the escalating tension and the specific allegations being made against Officer Brant. One reached for his radio, calling for backup. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up against authority? Share your experience below. Officer Brant's face had transitioned from confusion to pure rage. Veins bulged at his temples as Terrell continued reciting details from cases that should have been inaccessible to anyone outside the department. "You little—" Brant's control snapped. With a sudden explosive movement, he shoved Terrell hard against the courtroom bench. "Officer Brant," Judge Wilson called out, "restrain yourself." But Brant was beyond hearing. 20 years of carefully protected misconduct was being exposed in front of his colleagues, superiors, and the public. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all suddenly at risk. "Who sent you?" he hissed, his voice low but intense. "Was it internal affairs, or those civil rights vultures? When Terrell simply maintained eye contact, unflinching, Brant lost all professional composure. "You think you can come into my courtroom, you little punk?" His voice escalated with each word, spittle flying from his lips. Thwack! Brant's boot connected with Terrell's stomach, sending him crashing into the benches. Women screamed. Several people jumped to their feet. "Stop!" Marcus yelled from the defense table, half rising before his attorney pulled him back down. Court security finally moved forward, but slowly, their institutional allegiance to a fellow officer creating a damning hesitation that everyone in the courtroom noticed. "Stay down if you know what's good for you," Brant snarled, standing over Terrell, who had crumpled to the floor. The slur that followed echoed through the now silent courtroom. From his position on the floor, Terrell coughed, then laughed. The sound was incongruous with the violence just witnessed. Brant froze, momentarily confused. Terrell wiped a smear of fake blood from his lip, part of his carefully planned disguise, and slowly pulled his phone from his pocket. The red recording light blinked steadily. "Thanks for the felony battery charge, officer," he said, his voice suddenly deeper, colder, all pretense of youth gone. "That will make an excellent addition to the civil rights case." Brant stepped back instinctively, suddenly uncertain. With deliberate movements, Terrell peeled away the prosthetic cheek pieces that had altered the shape of his face. He unzipped his hoodie, revealing a perfectly pressed dress shirt and tie underneath. Rising to his full height, he was no longer the slouching teenager, but a commanding presence that filled the courtroom. "Devin Carter, attorney at law." His voice projected with practiced courtroom authority. "And you, Officer Brant, are screwed." He turned to face Judge Wilson, whose gavel had fallen silent. "Your Honor, I move for the immediate dismissal of all charges against Marcus Johnson, based on Officer Brant's demonstrated perjury and the assault just witnessed by this entire courtroom and recorded for the appeals court." Brant's face drained of color as he finally recognized the name. Devin Carter had successfully prosecuted 3 police misconduct cases in the last year alone. His reputation was legendary in legal circles. "Additionally," Carter continued, straightening his tie, "I will be filing criminal charges against Officer Brant for assault, perjury, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations under USC Title 42, Section 1983. I have documented evidence of 17 falsified reports over the past 36 months, and am prepared to present this evidence to a grand jury this afternoon." Silence enveloped the courtroom. Then, chaos erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors to phone in the story. Spectators stood on benches for a better view. Court security surrounded Brant, no longer certain who they should be protecting. The prosecutor buried her face in her hands, realizing she had built a case on fabricated evidence. And in the center of it all stood Devin Carter, phone still recording, evidence secure. His mission to expose systemic racism in the justice system accomplished more dramatically than he could have planned. Marcus Johnson stared at his unexpected savior, tears streaming down his face as the realization dawned that his nightmare might finally be ending. Brant's career and freedom disintegrated before his eyes. The protection of the badge that had shielded him for so long had finally failed, all because he had assaulted the wrong teenager in front of the wrong audience. The courtroom continued to erupt in pandemonium as reporters pushed toward Carter and security attempted to restore order. Judge Wilson's gavel pounded uselessly against the roar of voices. Brant stood frozen in shock, his world collapsing around him. Justice, so long denied, had finally arrived in dramatic fashion. Officer James Brant stood motionless, his face ashen as the reality of his situation crashed down around him. 20 years of carefully protected misconduct, exposed in an instant. The courtroom continued to buzz with shocked voices and hurried movements, but to Brant, everything seemed to move in slow motion. "This is a misunderstanding," he finally sputtered, his voice cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool temperature of the courtroom. Your Honor, I was simply restraining a disruptive individual. Standard procedure. Judge Wilson's expression had transformed from anger to grave concern. His longtime ally on the force had just committed assault in his courtroom, recorded and witnessed by dozens. "Officer Brant," the judge said carefully, "step away from Mr. Carter immediately." Brant's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for escape, for anything that might salvage the situation. Finding none, he took a faltering step backward. "That kid, that man, he provoked me," Brant insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "He interrupted official court proceedings. I was maintaining order." His hands trembled visibly as he gestured toward Devin. The prosecutor, who had worked with Brant on dozens of cases, refused to meet his gaze. She busied herself gathering papers, clearly distancing herself from the disaster unfolding before her. "Your Honor," Brant pleaded, turning back to the judge. "My record speaks for itself. 20 years of service, commendations. You know me." But Judge Wilson's face had hardened. Self-preservation instincts were kicking in. "What I know, Officer Brant, is what I just witnessed in my courtroom." Brant wiped his sleeve across his damp forehead, his breath coming in short gasps. The uniform he had worn with such pride for 2 decades suddenly felt constrictive, suffocating. His legs wobbled beneath him. "He had no right to interfere," Brant stammered, his words slurring slightly as shock set in. "He was impersonating. He was pretending to be—" The words died in his throat as he glanced at Devin Carter, who stood calmly adjusting his tie, the picture of professional composure. The contrast could not have been more stark, Brant coming apart at the seams while Carter remained collected. "My pension," Brant whispered, the implications finally hitting him fully. "My family." His shoulders slumped as the weight of his actions crushed 2 decades of carefully maintained authority. Everything he had built, destroyed in one moment of uncontrolled rage. The gallery erupted in a cacophony of reactions. Those who had witnessed similar abuses of power, particularly from the black community members present, exchanged knowing glances that spoke volumes. Validation after years of unheeded complaints washed over many faces. "That is what we have been saying for years," an older woman exclaimed, standing from her seat. "How many times did we report him? How many complaints were filed?" Others pulled out phones, fingers flying across screens as they shared the unbelievable courtroom drama with friends and family. Several nodded in solemn approval at the turn of events, justice finally visible after remaining elusive for so long. Marcus Johnson sat stunned at the defense table, tears streaming down his face. The weight of inevitable conviction that had pressed down on him for months suddenly lifted. His mother pushed past the gallery barrier and rushed to embrace him, both of them shaking with emotion. "I told you," she whispered fiercely into his ear. "I told you God would not let this happen to you." Marcus could only nod, words failing him as hope, unfamiliar after months of despair, flooded through his system. His public defender, David Reynolds, stood awkwardly nearby, a mixture of relief and embarrassment evident on his face. He had been outperformed by someone who had not even been officially part of the case. His legal pad was filled with notes about arguments he had failed to make. At the back of the courtroom, 3 reporters who had been half asleep during what they thought was a routine case now frantically scribbled notes. One whispered urgently into her phone, "Get down here now." Officer Brant just assaulted an undercover civil rights attorney in open court. This is going to explode. Judge Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly, the sound echoing ineffectually against the chaos. "Order, order in the court." His face had turned an alarming shade of red as he struggled to regain control of his courtroom. Several courtroom spectators had formed a protective semicircle around Devin Carter, their bodies creating a barrier between him and Brant. The spontaneous show of solidarity, from people who had been strangers moments before, spoke volumes about the community's hunger for justice. "I saw everything," a young woman told Devin, her phone held up. "I recorded it all. You can have a copy right now." "Thank you," Devin replied, his professional demeanor softening momentarily. "That will be very helpful." Marcus's mother approached Devin, taking his hands in hers. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice breaking with emotion. "My son does not belong in prison." "No, Ma'am," Devin agreed. "He does not." Two court security officers finally approached Brant, their movements hesitant as they faced the unprecedented task of detaining a police officer in uniform. "Officer Brant," the senior security officer said, "we need you to come with us, sir." Brant stared at them in disbelief. "You cannot be serious. I am one of you." "Not today, sir," the officer replied quietly. "Please do not make this more difficult." With visible reluctance, they escorted Brant toward the side exit, careful to avoid the handcuffs that would have been standard procedure for any other person who had committed assault in a courtroom. Even in his downfall, the blue line provided some protection. Judge Wilson, having finally restored a semblance of order, cleared his throat. "In light of these extraordinary circumstances, this court will take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Carter, Ms. Daniels," he nodded to the prosecutor, "and Mr. Reynolds in my chambers, immediately." As they filed out, Reynolds leaned toward Devin. "I had no idea about any of this. The evidence they gave me." "I know," Devin replied simply. "The system is designed to function this way." 20 minutes later, Judge Wilson emerged from his chambers, his face grave. "Based on the evidence presented and the events witnessed in this courtroom today, I am declaring a mistrial in the case of State versus Marcus Johnson." The gallery erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the judge's stern gaze. "Furthermore," he continued, "I am ordering the immediate release of Mr. Johnson from custody, pending further investigation into the conduct of Officer James Brant and potentially others within the department." Marcus closed his eyes, his body sagging with relief. "Court is adjourned." Judge Wilson's gavel fell with finality. As the courtroom cleared, the prosecutor approached Devin, her voice low. "There are others, are not there? Other cases, other officers?" "Yes," Devin replied simply. She nodded, her expression troubled. "My office will be conducting a full review of all cases involving Officer Brant." She paused. "This is going to be an earthquake for the department." "It needs to be," Devin said. Outside the courtroom, justice had been served in one case, but the broader battle was just beginning. As the immediate chaos settled, the true magnitude of what had happened began to emerge. This was not just about Marcus Johnson or Officer Brant. It was about a system that had allowed injustice to flourish unchecked for decades, and for the first time in years, that system had cracked, visibly, publicly, and irrevocably. 3 days after the courtroom confrontation, Devin Carter sat across from Marcus Johnson at a quiet corner table in the community center cafe. Marcus's ankle monitor had been removed that morning, the final physical reminder of his months-long ordeal. "I still cannot believe what you did," Marcus said, shaking his head in wonder. "You risked everything, your investigation, your career, for a stranger." Devin smiled slightly. "Not exactly a stranger. I have been tracking Officer Brant's cases for 14 months. Your situation fit a pattern I had documented 27 times. He opened his laptop, turning it toward Marcus. The screen displayed a complex spreadsheet with dozens of names, dates, and case outcomes. Every single one of these cases involved Brant targeting young black men with no prior records, fabricated evidence, coerced confessions, falsified reports. Marcus leaned forward, scanning the names. "I recognize some of these people, from my neighborhood." "That is how it works," Devin explained. "Targeted policing focused on specific communities. A judge who rubber stamps every warrant. A public defender system so overwhelmed that meaningful representation becomes impossible." He closed the laptop gently. It is not about individual bad actors, though Brant certainly qualifies. It is about a system designed to produce exactly these outcomes. But why go undercover? Marcus asked. You are a well-known attorney. Could you not have just taken my case? Devin's expression grew somber. I tried the traditional approach with 16 previous cases, filed complaints, submitted evidence, pursued civil rights violations through proper channels. He shook his head. The department closed ranks. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed statements after visits from other officers. The system protected itself. So you became Terrell. I needed irrefutable public evidence that could not be buried in paperwork or settled behind closed doors. Sometimes justice requires unorthodox methods. Devin paused, studying Marcus thoughtfully. What will you do now? Marcus straightened in his chair. I had planned to start community college before all this happened. Still want to. But this experience... He gestured vaguely at the space between them. It showed me something. How a single person can make a difference. You are thinking about law school, Devin observed. Is that crazy, after everything the system put me through? Not crazy at all. The system changed because people who saw its flaws decided to change it from within. Devin leaned forward. The law is just a tool. Like any tool, its impact depends on who wields it and why. Outside the cafe window, a news van pulled up to the community center. The Brant case had exploded across national media, sparked by smartphone footage from the courtroom that had gone viral within hours. 3 other officers from the same precinct had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Judge Wilson had recused himself from all cases involving the police department. They want to interview you again, Devin observed, nodding toward the news crew. Marcus sighed. I never wanted to be the face of this, but if my story helps someone else avoid what happened to me, that is how change happens, person by person, story by story. Devin closed his notebook. The department has agreed to review every case Brant touched over the past 5 years. The district attorney is establishing an integrity unit to examine potential misconduct. It is not perfect, but it is a start. Because of what you did, Marcus said. Because Brant made a mistake in full view of witnesses he could not intimidate or discredit. Devin's expression was serious. The fight for justice is not about dramatic courtroom moments. It is about the daily work of holding power accountable, documenting abuses, telling stories that would otherwise go unheard. Marcus nodded slowly. My mother always said that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit. Wise woman, Devin replied. You know what scares me, though. Marcus's voice grew quiet. What about all the people who do not have someone like you looking out for them? All the Marcus Johnsons who just become statistics? Devin did not have an easy answer for that. That is why we need more people who understand the system from both sides. People who have experienced its failures firsthand. As they walked out of the cafe together, camera crews gathered. What had begun as one case had sparked a broader conversation about policing, accountability, and justice. Community organizations had organized town halls with police leadership. State legislators were discussing enhanced oversight measures. For the first time in years, substantive change seemed possible. Marcus paused before stepping into the glare of the cameras. Do you think it will make a difference? All of this? I have to believe it will, Devin answered. What happened in that courtroom exposed not just one corrupt officer, but the machinery that protected him for years. People are paying attention now. He straightened Marcus's collar with the gesture of an older brother. Change comes slowly, then all at once. We just witnessed the all at once part. Now comes the harder work of making it permanent. The story of Marcus Johnson and Devin Carter reminds us that justice does not simply happen. It must be fought for with courage and vigilance. In courtrooms, community centers, and city halls across America, this struggle continues daily, often unseen and unrecognized. Systemic racism persists, not because of its strength, but because of our silence. It thrives in darkness, in unquestioned authority, in the assumption that things cannot change. But as this story demonstrates, when brave individuals stand against injustice, whether through dramatic confrontation or quiet, persistent documentation, the systems designed to protect the powerful can be transformed. The fight for equal justice is not a distant historical struggle, but an ongoing reality that requires our attention and participation. Every voice raised against injustice matters. Every witness who refuses to look away makes a difference. Every person who chooses courage over comfort helps bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Together, we can ensure these important stories never go unheard. The first step toward healing a broken system is acknowledging its flaws and committing ourselves to the difficult, necessary work of creating something better in its place. Justice awaits those willing to stand for it.